Hello everyone and welcome to this short presentation on quantifying climbing performance using the concept of VAM. It's a topic that often comes up in the cycling media around the time of the Tour de France, and it's based on a presentation that I've given a number of times at PBscience training camps. Alas, the video quality has never been good enough to share, so here it is in all its glory just for the website and our YouTube channel. So what is VAM? I won't butcher the Italian language by trying to pronounce that, but at least you know what it stands for. And essentially, it's a measure of speed. But we're interested in speed straight up and not along the road. So it's the vertical component of speed rather than the speed you'll have on your bike computer. And it's calculated simply by taking the vertical height gain and dividing it by the time taken. And it's typically presented in meters per hour. So at this point, if you're still not sure, maybe an example will help you. The famous climb of Alpe d'Huez, perfect example in my eyes. All we're interested in is the vertical elevation, so we take the elevation at the top of the climb, in this case 1,850 metres, and subtract the start elevation down in the town of Bourg-d'Oisans of 720, and we get a total elevation gain of 1,130 metres. The only other piece of information we need is the time taken, which can be from a stopwatch. The profile here is not just the full Alpe d'Huez climb, it's the time trial from the Tour de France back in 2004, I think, so it's a little bit longer. But I think the top guys completed the course in about 40 minutes that year. So to calculate the VAM in that case for the winner, we'll divide the total elevation gain, 1,130 metres, and divide that by the time in hours, so 40 minutes, 0.67, and we get a VAM of 1,687 metres. Hopefully not too complicated to calculate, I'm sure you'll agree. What does that mean? The table here is some notable VAM scores. Notable, I guess, if you look down the list of athletes who've completed them, they've got some dubious past there, but that's a debate for another day. The reason they're notable is that these are the highest values, or some of the highest values that have been recorded. I'm only going to use this to illustrate a few points about VAM. The first one being, if you look at the top climb, it's considerably higher than the rest. The climb of the Moor is much shorter than the rest of the climbs on the list. So first point, if you're going to compare VAM scores, you need to give a little consideration about the length of the climb that you're calculating on. So short climb, it's not sustainable power. The punchers, the top guys can power over those without having to worry about an hour-long climb. So if we discount Rebelin's time at the top there, the rest of those ones on the list are what I'd call sustainable climbs. Second aspect we're interested in, taking out the top one, you'll also notice that the Angliru and Monte Zoncolan feature near the top, and they're both famed as being very steep climbs. So the second aspect we're interested in is steeper climbs are going to give you a higher VAM than a less steep climb. So that's the second thing you need to bear in mind when comparing VAM scores. And that's really the aim of this slide. Is our first use of VAM is it's comparing climbs. The bottom four examples, they're all on Alpe d'Huez. We don't need VAM, we can just use a stopwatch. But if you're interested in comparing performances on different climbs, VAM might present one way you might want to do that. So if I climb Alpe d'Huez and it takes me an hour, the following year I go and I climb the Stelvio in 1 hour and 25 minutes, I want to know which is the better climb, which is the better performance for myself. If I calculate the VAM scores for both, it will give me a way of comparing those performances and deciding whether I've made an improvement or which is the better performance. I guess many among you at this point will be thinking, well, I don't need VAM, I've got a power meter, I can use power, I'm not interested in the speed. As long as my power's gone up, I use that as my measure of whether I've improved or not. The fact is, many people haven't got power meters, or in some cases, if you're looking at the performance of the pros, their power outputs might be closely guarded secrets. So what we're interested in with climbing is not necessarily power, it's relative power, so your watts per kilo. The main resistive force when you're climbing is going to be gravity, which acts on your weight. So relative power, watts per kilo, is what we're interested in. If we haven't got a measure of power output, where VAM really comes into its own is if we take the VAM and divide it by what we call this gradient factor times 100, we're going to get an approximation for the watts per kilo. The gradient factor is calculated by take the percentage gradient, divide it by 10 and add 2. So I won't go into the maths of it, but that's what the equation is, and it works. Again, if you're still not sure at this point, an example always helps. We take from that table previously, we take the highest sustainable power output, we ignore revenue like we say, and Contador on the Angliru in 2008. We want to estimate his watts per kilo. We take his VAM and divide it by that gradient factor times 100, so VAM of 1,877, average gradient of 9.9%, divided by 10, we get 0.99, add 2, 2.99 for our gradient factor. All comes out in the wash as an estimated relative power output of 6.28 watts per kilo, which, doing a little digging around on Wikipedia, it's probably not the best source, but just for illustration, his weight was reported as 62 kilos, which suggests he climbed the Angliru at 389 watts. We've got a rough estimate for his power output in that case, without having access to his SRM data or anything like that. I guess the naturally cynical amongst you, and I think all good scientists and athletes and coaches should be a little cynical when we see things like this, is just how accurate is that? Can we trust that power output figure? And I think one of the useful things on the training camp is we actually able to collect some data, calculate the VAM, and see how it matches up to the measured power from the different athletes' power meters. So it's by no means a huge sample of data, but his 4 athletes of different standards, who we got to do a time trial up to the Lluc Monastery in Mallorca on a PBscience training camp a few years ago, and you can see the predicted power based on our VAM model and the measured power from their cranks or their power tap wheels, and we've got a percentage error there. So ranging from 0.7%, pretty accurate prediction for the top one there, and I think the worst one being 5.9%, maybe less good, but still within a reasonable margin for error. I'd also point out that there were some doubts over the accuracy of that individual's power meter, so maybe we can improve that slightly if we can trust the power data a bit more. But again, I've performed these calculations on a lot of athletes, both on that climb and also other climbs around the world, and generally we're looking at an error of maybe 2 to 3%, which I'll leave it up to you whether you think that's a suitable margin of error. Maybe you can make that decision a bit easier if we look at some of the uses of VAM as well. So I'll move on to that. Beyond calculating power, we've got 2 examples so far, comparing different climbs. So is my climb of Alpe d'Huez better than my climb of the Stelvio? If we haven't got power output, we can use VAM to get an estimate for it based on climbing performance and an athlete's body weight. Another aspect, for those of you who have got power meters, you can still use VAM in a useful way, and I'm going to illustrate that with the example of the Haute Route sportif. So you can see the profile. It's a multi-day sportif, and it's typified from that profile. You can see by a huge amount of climbing. The way we use VAM, if you take an example athlete, I'll name him Bob just to protect his data. We know from training that Bob was able to sustain 260 watts. We did loads of training sessions to try and get an accurate figure for that, and we knew that 260 watts we thought would be sustainable over multiple climbs in a day and over many days during the event. What we didn't know from the power output is how that would translate into speed on the climbs and how long each stage was going to take. So although it told us what he could sustain, we didn't know how long each stage was going to be, and we didn't know how long each climb was going to take. So using the VAM concept, rather than calculating power output from VAM, we use the power output to calculate a sustainable VAM. So based on 260 watts, we knew the athlete's weight, and we estimate on average most of the climbs are around about 6%. So throwing that into our equation, we were able to calculate what we called a sustainable VAM of 800 meters per hour. At this point, it's still a little abstract. So again, taking the example further, that meant all the athlete in question, Bob, had to do was when he came to a climb, he'd look at the total elevation gain for the climb, divide it by a sustainable VAM, and that would give him a rough idea of how long each climb was going to take. So last year, the Passo de Gavia was included in one of the stages, 1,363 metres of elevation for that climb. We divide that by the sustainable VAM of 800, and we knew that the athlete in question would take roughly an hour and 42 minutes to summit it if they could sustain that 260 watts. So that then gave some information on pacing. It lets the athlete know how long they've got to sustain that effort for, which is, I think, quite an important thing when you're pacing a climb of that length. In actual fact, this is all the sort of calculations we did ahead of the athlete starting. So we knew roughly how long he'd be on each climb and how long each stage would take. But if you're just on holiday in the mountains, you hit the bottom of a climb and you don't know how long it's going to take you. You just take a look at the board at the start, and you can work out a rough idea of how long the climb is going to take, which I think can be useful in terms of pacing your effort, and helping with nutrition as well. You know how many bottles of drink you're going to need, how many gels, what sort of food you're going to have. So again, I think it's a useful way of translating what you know you can produce in a power output and actually into speed on the road to help with your pacing. So I say we know what VAM is. We've looked at comparing different climbs. So is my climb of Alpe d'Huez comparable with my climb of the Stelvio, as one example of where we can use VAM. If we haven't got a power meter, we can use VAM as a way of estimating power. We can then go further and use that for goal setting. So if I climb Alpe d'Huez in an hour and 10 minutes, I can use the concept of VAM to work out if I want to then go under an hour, what combination of a power increase or weight loss am I going to need? So what relative power am I going to need to achieve that goal of going 10 minutes quicker? So we can use it for goal setting. And within the cycling press, there's been some suggestion that you can use VAM for those pro cyclists who won't reveal their power outputs. It can be used in the fight against doping. So you can use it to flag up what you might term extraterrestrial performances, or things that are non-physiological and are potentially only achievable through doping. So it's not a place for this presentation, but I'll give a link at the end for that. And again, the example of the Haute Route says we can use VAM for pacing, course analysis, and again, things like gear selection. If we know our sustainable power output, we can work out how long a climb should take, and that gives us an idea of then we can calculate the speed on the road. And it's been very useful for me in my coaching, I think, to give data to athletes and persuade them that they probably do want to fit a compact and a large ratio cassette on the back to avoid spending an hour and a half on a long climb at 50 RPM. That said, I've painted a rather rosy picture of the concept so far. It does have its limitations. I've glossed over most of them here. Like I say, the length of the climb, the gradients affect it, drafting, wind, the effects of altitude. These are all things that are maybe going to decrease the accuracy. Say the 2 to 3% I showed on some of the data earlier is really going to be affected by some of these factors. And if this is really just a primer on the concept, if you're interested in how you can improve the accuracy, there's been a lot of alterations to the model, and again, I give a little bit of information that you can research yourself afterwards. So yeah, there you go. The two links at the bottom. Dr. Ross Tucker and his website, the Science of Sport. It's well worth a look if you're interested in the debate of using VAM and the similar performance analysis in understanding the performance of the professional cyclists. And there's a Twitter account there as well that goes much deeper into this kind of analysis. Again, if you're interested in understanding your performance a bit more, you might be interested in our video on the infamous VO2 max test. It's a nice contrast between VAM as a measure of measuring performance in the field with the control you can get by coming into the lab. And if you're interested in other videos based around sports science and coaching, then please do subscribe to the channel. There's quite a few videos in there already, and if you subscribe, you'll pick up the new videos as soon as they come available. So I've got a few ideas for topics in the coming weeks and months. And check out the website pbscience.com. If If video is not your thing and you want to read through some of our fact sheets, there's a lot more information on the website, so check us out. So if you made it this far, thanks for listening, and please do subscribe and check out the other videos on the channel.